Hi there, writers. Welcome to the Using Sources and Documenting Sources and Understanding Plagiarism video lesson and Google Slides for today, for this week. Just to remind you, this is a supplementary lesson. I'm not going to hit everything in the chapters that are assigned for this week, so you can see here or on the course schedule the chapters that this is meant to accompany. And so there's lots of important stuff in there that I'll just direct your attention to, but not necessarily go over step by step. So let's get started. Before we move on, I also want to remind you that on Classroom, under week 2, if you click open source usage resources, there are 3 links, maybe more coming by the time I post this, that will help you if you need some extra help on any of these. And I've tried to explain what each of the links is best for if you find that you're struggling on any of these. Of course, you can also always email me if you're struggling with incorporating sources or formatting your documentation correctly, or if you have any questions about plagiarism or academic honesty as well. So let's go ahead. First, of course, the philosophy behind why it's so important to document sources and to document them carefully. You're writing research papers, and so you just want to make sure you're acknowledging where those ideas came from. You know, people's careers went into researching them, and so you want to make clear to your audience where those came from, sort of to make sure you're giving credit to the people who did the research, who wrote the idea, who had the theory, or whatever it happens to be. It can also really help you with ethos, establishing your own credibility as a writer. If you have documented your sources well, you seem more professional, you seem more aware, you seem more like you know what you're talking about, and therefore your readers are more likely to trust you, to find you credible, and to believe you, and therefore you're more likely to be influential. You also want to make sure that your readers could find the sources that you've used. If they have a question, if they want to find out more, if they want to examine that source a little more carefully, they need to be able to find it. And again, that can help you establish your credibility. They may want to join into the conversation and learn a little bit more. And of course, to avoid plagiarism as well, or the stealing of people's ideas or even their exact words, and sort of making it seem like it was your idea or your evidence or your experience or your language and your wording. So it's really important that we get this skill of finding sources, but also documenting them correctly. So the textbook has a lot of great information for this. First, I want to talk about formatting your paper in MLA format. Hopefully you've had experience with this, but we will go over it really quickly. And the textbook on page 360, you should have it open as we go through this. So on page 360, you will see this blue box, MLA paper guidelines. That tells you the general stuff when you first open up your Google Docs, your Microsoft Word, the general stuff to make sure that your paper is formatted correctly. So pay attention to that blue box as you're formatting everything on your paper. I will go ahead and open up. This is the exact same paper that you have beginning on page 361 in your textbook. So you can follow along on screen here, but it's also in your textbook as well, and you can follow along there too. So the MLA header is over here in the top left. It's got your name, first and last, my name. You can just put Miss Everly. The name of the class, so this will say Comp 2 or ENGL 20 or 1030, whatever class you're in, and then the date. And notice how the date is formatted, the number, the month spelled out, and then the year with no commas or anything like that. Then you have your title. Please notice as well that the title is not bigger, it's not underlined. There's no extra spaces between the title and the date or between the title and the next line. It's just right there in the middle, and it's center justified. The title is center justified, as you can see up here. And then up in the header, if you double click, you can get up into the header. You'll put your last name and the page number. But if I just type 1, because this is page 1, since it's up in the header, it will replicate exactly what you type. So all of your pages will say page 1. If I try to change this one, they all say page 2. So if you've never done this before, you want to go up to Insert up here. And then if you go to Insert page number, and it looks really similar on Word as well, but you should be typing on Doc since you're submitting on Doc. You want to click this one here, or like upper right hand corner, and then that will insert the page number so that it changes. See, it's now changing at the top of each page. And then you can come in with your last name before it, so that way it correctly shows the page number that you're on. The first line of your paper just starts right under the title. Again, no extra spaces, and it's just tabbed over 1, just like a normal paragraph. So that's how you do the general setup of your paper. You'll notice too, if I scroll through here, all the way to the end is where you'll find your Works Cited page. So it's not on a separate document. Page 6 ends here, and then at the beginning of the next page is where we have the Works Cited page. It's numbered just like all the other pages. It's titled Works Cited, not big, not bold, not underlined. If you use the Microsoft Word or even Google Docs Auto MLA Works Cited page, it will do all kinds of crazy stuff to it, like a blue line, big title. You don't need to do that. Just put it right like this. And then as you can see, it should be over there, but it uses hanging indent. So the first line is all the way to the left. Any further lines in that same citation are tabbed over. So we'll get to the Works Cited page a little bit later, but I just wanted to make sure you saw it was here on the end of the paper, just the next blank page of the paper. All right, so if you have any questions about MLA, the textbook is a great resource, or you can always email me as well, and I can help you find it in the textbook if your answer is there. So let's talk about citations now and sort of how do you know when you should cite something that you're using? Practical Argument, page 374, if you want to go ahead and flip to that along with me. Very top of the page there says, regardless of the discipline, the following kinds of information should always be documented. So quotations, summaries or paraphrases, any opinions, conclusions, ideas that are not your own, statistics, visuals, charts and graphs, all of those things should be cited. And then right after that, it says the following kinds of information do not require documentation, including common knowledge. So these 2 charts here are not in your textbook, but they're actually really helpful. Is it in somebody else's words? If yes, quote and cite it. If not, a lot of students get confused. Even if it's an idea that came from someone else, you still need to cite it. But if it's your idea, of course, don't cite it. Did you think of it? Yes, but then you don't have to cite it. Did you think of it? No. Is it common knowledge? So common knowledge is like a basic fact, something that if I looked it up, it would be the same everywhere. So it's not anybody's personal work. It's not their personal research or their personal idea or opinion. It's just sort of a true fact. Like Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president. You don't have to cite that, even though not everybody might know it. It's going to be like generally agreed upon. Like maybe a conspiracy theorist would doubt that, or something like that. But for the most part, it's just a basic fact. So hopefully that answers questions that you might have about when you should cite. However, there are lots of different ways to get source material into your writing. So of course you can quote it, meaning put it in quotation marks and use their exact words. But a mistake a lot of students make is over-quoting. So they tend to use exact words for everything from a source they put into their paper, but you don't want to do that. Over-quoting is generally a mark of like a less mature use of sources. So here in the middle for quoting, you should only quote when that phrase is really important to your main idea, and it's also said in a really important way, so that if you change the language, you'd be missing something, because maybe it was, they use very powerful figurative language, or it was very shocking or stunning the way that they phrased it. Or you want to preserve the author's voice because it adds some sense of authority to your language. So you don't want to use too many direct quotations. I wouldn't, maybe like one every other paragraph or so. There's no real rule, but you want to make sure you're not overquoting. For the most part, you can paraphrase. So paraphrasing is putting an author's idea or fact into your own words. So you aren't maintaining the source's language, you're using your own words. You can also paraphrase to break down a complex concept. So if you read a sentence and it's full of like medical jargon and you think your audience, whoever it is you're specifically writing to, might not understand it, in that case, you may want to paraphrase it just to simplify the language a little bit, to make your readers more able to grasp what they're talking about. So you do want to paraphrase or summarize more frequently than quoting, actually. And you want to summarize anytime you bring in a quotation or a source, anytime you bring in a source for the first time, you want to offer a little bit of summary of what the source actually is. So the book, what is the overall book about? What is the overall journal about? Before you just pull in a random quote, because your readers really need to understand what it is that you're quoting from. And that's going to help them recognize your authority, know that you know what you're talking about, etc. But what's really important is whether you choose to summarize, quote, or paraphrase, you have to cite it, even if it's in your own words. If you're using material from a source, whether it's in their words or whether you've put it in your own words, you have to cite it. Otherwise, you could be committing accidental or a more serious form of plagiarism. And as it says here, Chapter 9, 329 to 335 gives really good information about how to quote, what to quote, when to quote, how to paraphrase, when to paraphrase, how to summarize, when to summarize. So please do make sure you've read that very thoroughly. So as practical argument page 345 says, so we're going to flip again. I'm going to give you a second here while I flip to page 345. Right under the blue box there, MLA documentation consists of two-part parenthetical references and then the works cited list. So the parenthetical citations occur throughout your paper. Anytime you pull in evidence or ideas from a source, you give a citation in parentheses. And then, of course, as we already took a sneak peek at, the works cited page at the end includes a list of all those sources that you use as you went through your paper. So back to page 361. Back to that sample paper. I just want to point out some of the parenthetical citations. So you can see here on the first page, here's a parenthetical citation. So we have a quotation in this sentence. Notice that the quotation isn't its own sentence. It's embedded. It's introduced. A recent survey found a little bit of a summary with a quotation embedded within the sentence. So the quotes aren't standing alone, which is really important. Then after the quote, you can see the parenthetical citation. And then a little bit of commentary, and then we lead into a new study where, again, there's a parenthetical citation. But notice in this sentence, there's no quotation, right? It's just a paraphrase of what that study found and then a quote, or a parenthetical citation. Here comes a new source with another citation on the end. So you can see a lot of synthesis, which is using sources together to support the main idea of the paragraph. And this is a mark of a really sophisticated essay. This one too, in the next paragraph that begins, "Not everyone is happy with this practice," we've got a quotation here from Kamenga, and then leads into a new quotation from Preston. Kamenga, Preston. So we're switching back and forth between sources. So again, it's a good mark of a sophisticated, mature use of sources. So that's what parenthetical citations look like. One really important thing is to not let quotes stand alone. So in red here is "don't do this." Unsurprisingly, most cats prefer fish tacos, and then suddenly comes the quote, right? Up here, you see the sentence begins with quotation marks, and the quote is its own sentence. We don't want to do that because then readers don't have any context for where the quote is coming from, what the quote means, how the quote connects to what you just said. You always want to lead into your quotes in a more natural way, and you never want to let a quotation stand by itself as its own sentence. We call that a dropped quote. This one is exactly the same. The writer here has just used a comma instead of a period. So technically this sentence should end here. This should be a period. So it's still actually a dropped quotation. It's just punctuated incorrectly. Grammatically, this quotation is still standing as its own sentence. So to fix it, we don't just turn it into a comma. Instead, we want to change the language so that we're leading into the quotation in a more fluid and natural way. So again, in red, "don't do this." Here is an example of an integrated quotation here on the bottom. So it's got a signal phrase. This is what we call a signal phrase because it signals who the source is and what the book is, right? So Yusef Smith, the author of According to Cat, suggests, comma, and then we lead smoothly into our quotation. So I'm going to give you a little metaphor here to help you remember. Anytime you pull in a quote, actually, or a paraphrase, this works the same whether you're using their words or whether you put it in your own words. Whenever you use a quote or fact from a source, use a quote sandwich. So you introduce your source, give your quote or fact, and cite it. So that's the meat, right? The actual source material. And then you always come back in afterwards and explain how that quote or fact supports or adds to your paper. So you don't ever just stick the quote in. You need the bun, and then you need the bun to sort of protect and sandwich it into your own writing. So never let a quote speak for itself. Quotes can't speak for themselves within your paper. You have to get them integrated into your ideas. So we use signal phrases. So here's another example of a signal phrase. According to Jerome Skolnick, comma, this one even includes some information about who that is, director of the study of law and society. So that's really helpful to establishing that this person knows what he's talking about. So if your author, the first time you use a source, if the author has qualifications, tell me who they are. Tell me what they wrote. Tell me what the study is. Give me a little bit of summary or information about the source. Here comes the quote, and then the parenthetical citation. We'll talk about what goes in there soon. Here's another one. Jerome Skolnick argues that the policy is effective. This is a paraphrase. They've put "it's a good social policy" in their own words, but still needs to be cited. So in practical argument on page 338, 339, there is a blue box, templates for using identifying tags. It looks like this, page 339. This is a really helpful box to help you pick a good signal phrase. So the article explains, the essay suggests, right? So you can sort of mix and match these to help you lead into your summaries, paraphrases, or quotations. So if you find yourself with dropped quotations, come back to this box. So another way that you can do it, you don't always have to use a signal phrase. You can just embed. So down here in green, you can just embed the quotations into your own sentence. The reason most cats prefer fish tacos is because of their delightfully fishy taste. And then in this one, because I haven't used the author's last name as in the signal phrase. See this one up here, Yusef Smith. So we don't put Smith here. This one doesn't say where it's coming from, so we do put Smith in here along with the page number that it came from. Again, we're going to talk about parenthetical citations here in a second, but that's sort of a very fluid way to integrate into your own writing. Okay, so on page 345, 347, it's a really helpful breakdown of what to put in those parentheses. So how to actually cite your quote, how to actually cite your paraphrase within your paper as you go. In MLA format, in-text citations include the author's last name and then the page number from which you pulled the quote or idea. In that order, author's last name, page number. But what do you do if you already used the author's name in the signal phrase, like the author says, comma, quote? In that case, you just put the page number in parentheses because you've already used the author's last name here. It would be redundant to again put Smith 12 here. I already know it's Smith by the signal phrase. There are other special cases as well. What do you put in parentheses when the work has two authors, when it has no author? A source that's quoted in another source. A work without page numbers. If there's no page number, what do you do instead of the page number? What if it's a really long quotation that you want to include? So page 345 to 347 answers all of these questions and others as well. So if you have a special case, please make sure you're using the textbook as a resource there. There are some special cases that aren't listed in the textbook. You can always Google it. Just Google MLA 8 parenthetical citation, work with 3 authors, right? Whatever it is. And just make sure it's a reliable source that you're checking, a source from a university or a library, and it'll probably be accurate. I just want to remind you as well, after you get that quotation in there and you get the parenthetical citation on the end, don't just move on. You always need to explain that evidence and how it supports your argument. So you've got your idea, your evidence to support it, and then you have to link that evidence back to your main point. Otherwise, the evidence is just sitting there and your reader doesn't know what it's supposed to do for them. So you always come back in and explain that evidence, tell readers how to interpret that evidence, tell readers what they were supposed to get out of that quote or to get out of that statistic. So that way the evidence is actually working to support your argument. So if you don't know how to do that, here are some helpful questions from this website down here that you can click on if you open up the slides on your own. Okay, I've just stated this point, but so what? Why is this important to my point? What does this information imply? So sort of read between the lines for your readers and break it down for them. Why is this true? So you've pulled in a quotation, but give me some of your own analysis of why that is true. Why is this information important? Why does it matter? How is this idea related to my thesis? Number 7 is really important here, or to the main point of my paragraph. Can I add anything to this evidence? Maybe I have some personal experience that relates. Maybe I have an example that relates. So always come back in. Otherwise, you run the risks of having a paper that's way too source heavy and you sort of lose your own voice. You lose your own argument. The sources that you pull in are not supposed to speak for you. You're using the sources to help you speak. And that's a really important distinction. So again, that source sandwich metaphor. Your idea is the first few sentences of the paragraph. Then you pull in source material. And after each piece of source material that you pull in, you have to explain the so what of that quote, the so what of that statistic or idea or whatever it is that you've pulled from another source. So a reminder to set up the MLA Works Cited page. Take a look at that sample paper again on page 361. I'll pull it up here for you again. It's on the very last page. Anything on this is something that's been cited throughout the paper. So, and everything you cite in the paper. Online behavior. That means if I see that in parenthetical citations, I should be able to scroll down here and find something called, here it is, online behavior. So whatever you cite in the paper is supposed to lead me, here's bond, right? It's supposed to lead me exactly to, oh look, here's bond. So it should lead me exactly to what that source is so that I could go check it out if I wanted to find out more. The other really important thing here is that these are in alphabetical order, so B, C, F, R, I, L, N, right? So whatever the first letter is, even if there's a quotation around it, whatever the first letter is in alphabetical order here. Again, to help your readers find that source really easily. Okay, here's number of employees, so I should be able to go down to the ends. Oh, here's the source I'm looking for, and that's the point of organizing the paper in this way. So you may have questions about how to create that works cited entry. So on the actual works cited page, we put things in a particular order. Author's last name, comma, author's first name, the title, the thing it came from, USA Today, in italics, the date it was published, the link, right, for a web link. This one comes from it's got like the publisher here, right? So there are different requirements based on the type of thing that you're looking at. And it would take a very long time for me to try to explain what to do for each of those. So practical argument, page 345 to 359 lists how to create that entry for a journal, a newspaper, a book. What do you do if the book has multiple authors? A podcast, an online database, a journal article, like everything you can imagine. You can also just Google MLA 8 works cited page blank, whatever type of thing that you have. If it's a reliable source, it's probably going to be accurate, or you can check with me if it's something you're not finding in there. Finally, I want to wrap it up with a few notes on academic honesty. It's never a good thing when I discover that a paper has either intentional or accidental source usage errors that would constitute plagiarism. So I want to make sure that you are aware of what those are. So again, practical argument, page 374, what to cite. So hopefully there's no misunderstandings about what types of information you should be citing. Correctly cited quotations are the opposite, right? If you are including common knowledge, you do not have to cite it. Cited paraphrases that are in the author's own words and style, so as long as you cite them, you're fine. So what constitutes plagiarism? These are some of the most common. Quoting without using quotation marks or without citing it. So in other words, using somebody else's exact words without saying where they came from and without putting quotation marks around them. Really, really important that you check out how to paraphrase appropriately, because if you paraphrase but you keep the language too close to what they did, so for example, you just switch out a few words or you take out a few words, but you don't put quotation marks around it, that can still count as plagiarism. So please make sure you pay attention to that in the textbook. If you take an idea from a source and put it in your own words, please cite it. If you do that but you don't cite, you have committed plagiarism because you're taking somebody else's idea, putting it in your own words, and making it seem like you came up with it. Statistics or specific ideas from a source, make sure you cite those as well. I want to alert you too to the idea of self-plagiarism, which a lot of people know. There's some debates about whether this should be considered plagiarism, but it is. UCM's handbook does consider it a form of plagiarism. So that's when you submit something to a class that you've already used in a previous class. So let's say you wrote a paper in high school, you turn it in again in college. That is considered self-plagiarism. And the reason for that is because you are given credits in exchange for work that you do for this class. And so we want to make sure that you're actually doing the work for this class. So in other words, don't resubmit your papers that you've submitted before. Don't recycle parts of papers that you've already used. Like don't take your paragraph from your high school paper and stick it in this paper. The work that you do for this class should be for this class. And also collusion, which is mentioned in the handbook as well, which is working together on something that you are not supposed to be or not meant to be working together on. So any type of assessment, a test, a homework assignment, if it was given to you and it was given as an independent or intended as an independent work, then it should be done individually. So having somebody else actually go into your document and change some of your wording to make it sound better is collusion, because you're receiving a grade for the quality of your writing. And if somebody else is going in and fixing your writing and you're not involved in that process, that can be considered collusion. Doing research for someone else. So if you have somebody else look for sources and tell you sort of what quotes you can use, that could be considered collusion. So make sure your papers are your own papers, even down to the edits. If somebody makes a suggestion like this paragraph needs more evidence, that's helpful. That's peer review, right? That's not them actually putting in more evidence for you. So if you have questions about that, please let me know.